I've been looking forward to this one for quite some time. This is an interesting one. What begins as a fairly unique take on a slice-of-life-esque story with a pretty realistic depiction of a depressed protagonist spirals into a tense mystery that plunges everyone's life into chaos. The story follows Yama Ishimoto, the aforementioned depressive and troublingly relatable lump, as he tries his best to lead a normal life. That is, until he is dragged into a mystery that'll push his mind to its limits. You see, students have begun to go missing around his school, and a detective has recruited him to help with the investigation. Sadly, things aren't as simple as our protagonist is initially led to believe, as these disappearances are actually the extremely brutal and sadistic murders where kids are practically dissected alive. Did I mention this story is pretty dark? Because, well, it is. As for what you do as the player slash reader slash however you want to refer to yourself, you make several choices, some having more importance than others, some sections even requiring you to go full detective mode as you try to piece together this winding plot, all the while trying to keep Yama's personal life from falling apart. Though, despite this large amount of choices, there is only one actual ending, aside from the myriad of bad ends at least. For now, anyway. Yama, our protagonist. Self-loathing, depressed, edgelord to the max, a real bundle of joy. Despite his tendency to beat himself up, he's actually quite intelligent, a feature that is tested repeatedly over the course of this story. Rui, a good old childhood friend. Having met Yama shortly after a certain, slightly traumatizing event, she's been by his side ever since. Between the light banter she and Yama share, her bouts of tsundere-esque stubbornness, and her all-around lovable nature, it's quite difficult not to like her. Misaki, childhood friend part 2. She met Yama an undefined amount of time after Rui, but the three were still extremely close. However, after some family stuff happened, they were separated. As for her personality, it's a tad difficult to pin down with a couple clips. She's really into social media and seems to like getting into a bit of trouble. A slightly smug, headstrong type, I suppose. Elizabeth, uptight, obsessed with grades, British, because apparently that's a character trait. She's an interesting one. On first inspection, I'm inclined to call her a tsundere, but that doesn't sound quite right with her. She's got the aggressive nature, but that's nowhere near as over-the-top as tsunderes often are. With her, that aggression tends to take the form of some particularly biting banter, but as you get more familiar with her, it becomes a bit more playful. Akira, probably on drugs. Which ones? I'd guess all of them. Joking aside, she's a bit difficult to pin down for a completely different reason from Misaki. Since the moment you begin to think you figured out what's going on in her head, she'll steer the conversation in a different way so hard your head would probably go flying into orbit if the conversation was a car, and the direction it was moving was dictated by the direction or topic of the conversation. I feel like this analogy got a bit away from me, but given the character, I think I can just say it was on purpose and continue. Airi, a quiet, mysterious type. She never quite seems to be paying attention, only to say something just on topic enough to prove otherwise. Though her statements do often tend to take the form of video game references. Off-brand ones, of course. Can't have those copyright plays coming after us now, can we? Ryota! What do you know, a male adult in a visual novel. With a sprite, no less. What kind of madness is this? Anyway, yeah, he's pretty much the perfect cool teacher archetype. Easygoing, doesn't really seem to care about his responsibilities, plays RPGs during work hours, that kind of stuff. He usually takes the role of Yama's counselor slash psychologist, but also plays a fairly important role in the investigation. Yahiko, the ditz to end all ditzes, or so it seems. Much like Akira, it's exceptionally difficult to figure out what he's thinking. Also like Akira, he often gets caught up in his own outlandish fantasies. I'm beginning to think he's just a clone of Akira. Oh, I know. Unlike Akira, he seems dead set on becoming some variety of cult leader. I mean, he even refers to his friends as minions. Huh. You know, it's not until now that I realize just how concerning he is. Masato, an overbearing athletic type, who is also an honor student. Though that may sound impressive, his head revels tungsten in terms of sheer density. Most jokes fly so far over his head that you need to warn the International Space Station of a possible impact. Speaking of rivals, he also seems absolutely obsessed with competitions, especially when Yama's involved. Much to Yama's dismay. Shigure! Not that one. A detective sent to investigate the disappearances. She, recruits Yama to act as her assistant by the oh-so-reliable method of pulling him off the street. She's intended to be quite intelligent, as evidenced by her extravagant vocabulary, but I have to question her method of finding people to work for her. Anyway, beyond her weird methods, she also seems intent on testing the patience of those around her to the best of her ability, hurling so much overly verbose verbal abuse that you really feel sorry for everyone who has to work for her. Though she does have somewhat of a sweet side if you manage to avoid angering her. Kind of. And finally, What do you mean redacted? This thing's supposed to be a little above confidentiality. Especially considering, you know, she doesn't exist. Unless, I mean, could you be one of my colleagues? That's unlikely, but maybe I should send you to check it out. Wait, no. Nope, this is just their doing in the first place, isn't it? Yeah, that sounds about right. And here I was wondering where she would run off to after I made that body of hers. Well, I guess we can just get on with the video then. Thanks for the scare. While this is definitely a mystery of the end, it focuses just as much, if not more time on detailing Yama's daily life and his struggles. In particular, his self-loathing attitude and his tendency to downplay his importance makes him almost painfully relatable at times, which may be saying more about me than him, but still. It handles these aspects of his character really well, both on how he processes these issues and how other characters end up perceiving them as well. Of course, this isn't to say that the mystery is completely overshadowed. In fact, I'd say these two sides of the story interact really interestingly. After all, an already mentally disturbed student suddenly being dragged into a murder investigation as twisted as this one is bound to leave some mental scarring. But here I am going on about the psychological aspects again. Anyway, the mystery. Yes, it's also really good. While there are a couple key flaws that can hinder it that I'll be going into shortly, it definitely stands out from other mysteries I've seen, limited a pool as that may be. Practically every bit of information given over the course of the game ends up coming into play in one way or another, even the most throwaway sounding line like the land of missing socks is a payoff. As this is the case, however, it definitely means you need to be paying pretty close attention for the plot to make sense. Blink and you may well miss a vital piece of the puzzle, more so given the deduction sequences I mentioned earlier. In fact, it's not just the dialogue this applies to. While there are only a couple examples, you even need to take a look at the sprites of certain characters to get some things. This fact threw me for a bit of a loop the first go around. I definitely found myself wondering how on earth I was supposed to know some things, but upon closer examination, every bit of information you need is there if you look hard enough. But even then, sometimes it's not just looking you'll need to do. There are some bits of the mystery that you're expected to piece together on your own using the information given to you. Though this is the case, for the most part, you aren't punished for mistakes you make during these deduction sequences. The only thing really on the line is whether or not you get an achievement. This is until you reach the climax of the game. My first go-around proved to be quite a challenge, much to my surprise. For me at least, when I think of visual novels, difficulty is far from the first thing that comes to mind, but here we are. Based on what I've heard, most people have had to look up a guide to figure out how to get through, so while I'd normally avoid saying something like this for fear of spoilers, I'll give you a bit of a tip at the end of the video to help you out. However, much as I'd like to sing this game's praise through the entirety of this video, there are a number of imperfections. Nothing I'd consider game ruining, but enough that they can prove rather distracting. First and most obviously is a bug that occurred since the last content update. From what you may have seen in the background footage, sprites will sometimes fail to load from time to time. This usually only happens for one line of dialogue or until the sprites change, but it can definitely pull out of the immersion. Luckily, it's only really common in certain scenes early on when the stakes aren't too high, and for the most part it's pretty rare elsewhere. On to flaws with the story itself, I feel like the segments from the eyes of the murderer weren't really necessary. The entire mystery can be pieced together without any information from these scenes, but even worse off, they practically give away the mystery in the first one of them, if you're paying enough attention. I mean, dramatic irony is one thing, but this just seems like a bit much. I think these scenes could have been completely cut and the story would have only benefited from it, since all they really do to serve is break up the already kind of wonky pacing and give away too much information. I understand that they would want to show the brutality of these murders, but they already do that through other scenes. While this definitely sounds like it'd hinder the game quite significantly, don't forget the other half of this game's appeal. Even if you figure out who the big bad is, you've still got the psychological / thriller elements, which are high enough quality that I'd say it's still worth it to continue. And lastly, in the beginning segments, the pacing does feel rather off. Though that could be chalked up to my rather low attention span, there is one segment in particular that really stands out, that being the amusement park scene. I mean, just look at this. You made to go through all of these. Like, I understand what they're going for here, giving every character their own scene with Yama to highlight some aspect of their personality, but it just drags on for so long that it took an entire day of playing off and on just to get through it. It's not even that it's entirely filler either. There are a number of pretty important information drops in this segment, but it just feels like they could have gone about this better. Maybe rather than condensing it all into one big scene, they could have spread it out a bit more. The main heroines already get certain choices where you can go and spend time with them. Maybe some of this information could have been dropped in some of those scenes, or in additional ones later on. Then again, that'd mean there's potential for you to completely miss out on some of that information. I mean, this does follow what's built up to be a big group investigation. They could have formatted that scene to serve the purpose this one does, since not a whole lot learned from that one in comparison. Thing is, the information given at the park isn't directly related to the mystery, so that might not work all that well either. Guess this is why I'm not a writer, huh? Either way, my point still stands. This bit could have definitely been better, but, well, I don't really want to end this segment on such a low note. And luckily, I don't have to, because right after, and I do mean right after this dreaded amusement park scene, the story picks up 100-fold. The tension rises, things go wrong, it hooks you unlike any bit prior. When looked at this way, I suppose that scene could be seen as a last bout of happiness before things fall apart. Great, now I'm even more conflicted. And finally, the ending. Oh boy, the ending. You know how when I was reviewing Eden Asterisk, I said the ending was a bit of a kick to the feels? Well, this one's a full-on combo attack. Of course, I can't go into too much detail, just brace for pain. Both of the contents of it, and the fact that it's a cliffhanger. Indeed, the story is not yet complete. Right, I should probably talk about that. Yeah, the story's not done, and it leaves you on a pretty big cliffhanger. A cliffhanger that's been going on for several years now. While this is indeed frustrating, it's not as though it's without reason. After all, the game is free, and pretty friggin' good considering. Actually, no, despite my ranting, this game's great, period. One of my favorites, in fact. That said, while the wait is indeed quite painful, don't go harassing the people behind it for taking so long. They need to eat, after all. While I do think they could be a bit more open in terms of progress updates and such, well, something tells me an endless list of percentages wouldn't do a ton to please the fans. So, while I would absolutely recommend this game, I'd also ask that you be patient. Something this good takes time. Luckily, there is a bit more here than when I first played. I mentioned a content update earlier. That takes the form of a series of prologues, though I'd say they function more like teasers for the routes that are coming in the future. There's not a whole lot to them, but they're of the same quality as the rest of the game. And while there does seem to be some skepticism regarding the new direction of the story, I'm quite optimistic. What can I say, I like some large-scale conspiracy stories. And I am quite curious how a route-based format will work here. There is also a voice acting patch planned, but, well, the cast for that seems to still be in flux, so who knows when that's going to be coming out. And here I said this wasn't going to be left off on a low note. Huh. The music is surprisingly high quality, much like the rest of the game. Urban Disturbance, the menu music, Melancholy, all forms of it, and Disturbed are probably my favorites. The game probably has some of the best menu music I've ever heard, especially after Part 1, the main game. Though, sadly, the music added in the Heroine Prologue update is not included in the downloadable OST. Seriously guys, get on that. I want to listen to some dramatic music while I'm learning to draw Tai-Hen. The art is also pretty high quality, though the characters can look a tad off at times. Arms tend to look kind of stubby, and characters' faces in CGs look kind of weird. The eye placement in particular seems rather wonky. How many ways can I say things look weird in the same sentence, I wonder? The script has a couple mistakes here and there, but nothing too major, mainly taking the form of small typos. These primarily appear in the prologues. The character writing is also very high quality. Like I said before, the main character is really unique and quite relatable when you're a comparably broken lump of sentient matter. Everyone else is also quite good. Though I would say there is a bit of an imbalance when it comes to time given to different characters, especially Akira. For the majority of the game, she doesn't really have a ton to do, though after her prologue that does seem to be changing a fair bit. This is an extremely high-quality visual novel. Like I said, it's among my favorites. The interaction between the slice-of-life-esque segments and the dark mystery is really unique, the characters are good, and despite its flaws, nothing really acts as a deal-breaker. Of course, due to how slow the game is to get rolling, a degree of patience is definitely needed. The beginning segments in particular can prove to be quite a bit of a slog, but once you get past that, it's really something special that no description I could give can really convey. Plus, the game's completely free, so it's not like you have much to lose by checking it out, and it's not uncommon for people to come out of it with a new favorite game. And there we have it. This is a video I've been looking forward to making since I started this channel, and I figured it'd be a good review to round off this chaotic mess of a year. I was just putting it off because, well, I wanted to do it justice. Even now, I feel like I could have waited for my reviewing abilities to get better, but, well, if I continued putting it off with that excuse, I'd probably never get around to it. And there we go. The video's over. Why does this keep happening? You can go now! I yell at the viewer despite being the one to extend the video. There has to be a point to this, right? Oh yeah, the hint! When you find yourself at the train station, and all hope seems lost, you receive a call. Listen to every word that is said. The key to what follows lies in their advice. Was that cheesy enough for you?